Teal Swan. Just hearing the name can give you goosebumps. For some, it's because she's their guru. She's ethereal, all knowing. For others, the name invokes bad memories, trauma, and regret. Like Voldemort, she's someone many want to forget and ignore. But she always seems to be there, lingering in the dark woo woo spaces of the internet. It seems no matter how many exposés are released or documentaries are made, she still seems to maintain her following. Despite these millions of followers, she's been a controversial figure for over a decade. From her unbelievable claims of what happened to her during her childhood to her questionable beliefs surrounding mental health, all the way to the magical gifts she claims to possess. Today, we're going to explore the claims she's made and really try to unpack the truth behind Teal Swan and uncover who she really is, a deity or simply delusional. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh Erin. Hello, everyone, and welcome back, or welcome if you're brand new. If you're listening to the podcast version, hello and thank you. I am so excited to share that we have officially launched the Let the Fresh Erin podcast on Spotify. So, since we have some people who aren't watching the video version, I'm going to be making some verbal disclaimers here. But first, please like and subscribe to the channel, leave a review on the podcast, and as always, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate your support. This piece is for entertainment purposes only. It is not meant to malign anyone from any person, group, organization, or entity, and I am certainly not diagnosing anyone. My opinions, speculations, and analysis will be sprinkled throughout this video and recording, so please know that anything I say that isn't corroborated by other sources online might just be my opinion or speculation. Even if the information is corroborated by another source, please do not take anything as fact and always make sure to do your own research. I am sharing the information I learned to the best of my understanding, so if I misinterpreted anything, please let me know. Also, viewer discretion is strongly advised. There will be talks of child abuse, rape, depictions of graphic satanic rituals that involve murdering people and children, as well as doing destructive things to corpses. There will also be heavy discussions around unaliving and mental health. So, if any of these topics feel triggering to you, I highly recommend you skip this episode. And please make sure you're always taking care of yourself. Like many others, I fell upon Teal Swan's teachings years ago when I was first beginning my spiritual journey. When I was in my 20s, I became involved with an older man who was well known in the city where I had just moved to a few months prior. See, I was fresh out of college and decided to move to the big city of Chicago to pursue my dreams of being on SNL one day. I enrolled in classes at both the Second City and IO Chicago, and soon I was heavily integrated into that small community within a massive city. The improv scene in Chicago became my whole world. I'd work my boring day job so I could afford to take multiple classes at multiple theaters every week. This was the norm. If I wasn't in classes, I was performing at tiny hole in the wall bars, doing improv with my friends. And if I wasn't doing that, I was at IO or the Second City watching improv and sketch comedy shows. This was my life, all 7 nights a week. And that's what was expected, especially if you ever wanted to be on SNL one day. You'd have to be able to handle that grueling schedule. The huge city of Chicago became very small very quickly. So when a teacher slash guy who was on the most popular team at IO showed his interest in me, of course I had to say yes. That's the very creed of improv itself. I was young, impressionable, and hungry to be accepted by my peers and my mentors. But the caveat was, according to him, teachers weren't allowed to date students, so our relationship had to remain a secret. And I kept that secret for over a year. When you finish the conservatory at IO, you get to audition to perform on their stage, and I was thrilled. I felt confident in my abilities and knew that up on that stage was where I belonged. But when the email came congratulating the new performers and my name wasn't listed, I was heartbroken. I had devoted my life to this. When all my college friends went to LA or New York, I chose Chicago. I knew two people in the entire city. What would I do now? And suddenly I was inundated with texts. How did you not get on a team? I'm shocked you didn't make it. And although I was grateful for that support, it hurt all the same, especially considering my secret boyfriend was one of the decision makers. And not only did I not get on the team, but he was now refusing to go public with me. I would find out later that this was because he had manipulated me. He was cheating on me with other students. Well, one that I know for sure of, but I'm sure there were others. His close friend and other well known man in the community was a cheater who had recently gotten his mistress pregnant, so I guess I should have known. The HR department at IO that he told me would fire me if I dared tell a soul about his and my relationship, it didn't exist. There were no rules in place protecting the students. He just created that story so he could be the creepy predator he was, targeting girls in their 20s, fresh off the proverbial boat, who were eager to get into the good graces with a decision maker like him. I wouldn't be surprised to find out if he was the main reason I didn't get past that audition. Having me in the space as a performer would mean he couldn't be the vile creep that he so enjoyed being. When the truth came out, I was devastated and I needed support, but there really wasn't any. I had lied to my new friends for over a year. Plus, he was important, perhaps even a figurehead in the community. And this was before Me Too. So the reaction when I told people my story was, well, you should have expected this coming from someone like him. That's just how it is here. My world view was utterly shattered, and I felt completely isolated. To cope with my thoughts of wanting to end it all, I drank, I was manic. The few friends who remained were concerned about me. I missed auditions. I'd get drunk and leave food in the oven and then fall asleep, almost burning down my apartment building. So saying I was a mess would be an understatement. Finally, after several months, I decided I needed to make a change. I further isolated myself from that quote unquote community. I stopped drinking and I stopped pursuing comedy in the same way and started focusing on my mental and physical health. I eventually decided to become a yoga teacher. And this would be where I first started to hear spiritual quotes and guidance from gurus. The teachers would guide us to meditate at the end of every class. They'd speak out about protecting our energy. We discussed the chakras and how emotions can get stuck in our bodies. And I learned that I could manifest my way into a better life, into better circumstances. I wanted to be whole and pure. The more I sought out this spiritual purity, the more gurus, quotes, and videos I was exposed to thanks to our trusty algorithm. Quotes by Osho and Abraham Hicks fell across my iPhone screen. I started listening to spiritual podcasts and began following healers and tarot readers. I spent hours in my car during my food delivery job listening to the live recordings of Abraham Hicks healing her or his there because there's three of them, apparently. I listened to them for hours heal their pupils in front of a live audience. So, of course, finally, I would fall upon Teal Swan, a beautiful woman with a dead stare and a monotonous yet soothing tone, staring firmly into the camera lens. She spoke with a methodic, meditative authority, as if she knew something I didn't. And soon I would learn that, yeah, she sure thinks she knows everything you don't. Now, call it the inner skeptic in me, or that by the time I had unpacked so much of the manipulation that had occurred in the relationship with my ex, or maybe it was a new fascination with a cult I'd recently become obsessed about learning about called Scientology. Something just felt off to me about Teal. I was vulnerable. I had had unaliving ideations. I should have been the perfect target. But perhaps it was the lack of life I saw in her eyes, or the way her speech patterns gave me the impression that she was reading off a teleprompter while acting like she was channeling words from above. Something just raised red flags within me. However, it would take me years to truly understand and uncover why something felt so off about Teal. And that's because perhaps something was. If you were to ask Teal, she might even agree with that statement, because according to her, she's experienced so much trauma and that most humans can't even comprehend it. But when we compare her story with the story of some of those closest to her, things don't really add up. And in order to truly understand Teal and how she got to where she is today, we need to start at the beginning. Teal Swan was born Mary Teal Bosworth on June 16, 1984, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, to parents who she claims were simultaneously hippies and scientists. Now, I don't always consider those two descriptors interchangeable, so I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle there. Perhaps they were hippies in lifestyle and scientists in vocation, as her mother was a school counselor and her father was a science teacher. In 1988, the family decided to move to or near Logan, Utah, when Teal was about 4 years old. She says her parents moved to be wilderness rangers on a lake, but also shares that they worked at the school there. So some have alleged that during the school year, her parents did work at the school, and then over summer break, they worked at the lake. This new town they were living in was smack dab in between two meccas of the Mormon religion, Salt Lake City and Rexburg, Idaho. Many people in the community were Mormons, and according to Teal, word traveled fast throughout her new small town about the new non believers who had just moved there. And Teal was immediately ostracized. Furthermore, Teal claims that even at such a young age, she knew she was different. She knew she had extrasensory abilities like being able to speak to people who have passed on, or even being able to touch people and heal them. She felt she had a better understanding of the world around her, and this scared people, including her parents. And it scared the folks living in Logan, apparently, because Teal found it very difficult to make friends and connections. She shares how she made her kindergarten teacher uncomfortable by sharing insights from the teacher's dead relative, and that since she wasn't Mormon, parents wouldn't let Teal play with their children. Plus, Teal claims to have been an extremely shy child. She was the town pariah, and word began to spread about these special abilities. Since Mormonism is inherently patriarchal, Teal believes that a girl who exhibited otherworldly abilities must have created a threat for them. Not only a threat, but perhaps Teal was evil. If men led the church, that meant a woman must lead the church's enemies. In an attempt to socialize her shy daughter, Teal's mom, Mrs. Bosworth, organized a play date with another girl. By this time, it's 1989. And I want to mention that as we move forward, the timeline does get a little murky. It seems Teal can't quite keep her story straight. So if I misunderstood anything in this timeline, please share your thoughts or corrections in the comments. So Teal is about 4 years old at this time and is about to have her very first play date and sleepover with her new friend, whose dad happens to be a friend of her mom's. So I guess there's a level of trust there. Of course, my very shy child who can't seem to fit in or make friends and is apparently having her very first ever play date can just go ahead and spend the night. Sure makes a lot of sense. But this would end up being the first night of 13 years of alleged torture and abuse by her keeper, who we will come to know as Doc. You see, this friend of her mother's wasn't a friend at all. He was a man affiliated with a satanic cult in the area. This was a blood atonement satanic cult, one of two Mormon satanic cults in the area who were seemingly at odds with each other. Much like the FLDS, who split from traditional Mormonism to continue practicing polygamy, the blood atonement cult split off after the church changed their policy on blood atonement. It was once believed by the Mormons that some sins couldn't be forgiven just by the blood from Jesus. They could only be forgiven by shedding the blood of the man who sinned. That man would be killed in such a way that his blood would touch the ground. Sins that required blood atonement were sleeping with someone before marriage, theft, and rejecting your religion's beliefs or living the religion, aka cult, altogether. Conveniently, adultery was left off the list of sins that required atonement. Tell me you're living in a patriarchy without telling me you're living in a patriarchy. So, the father of this new friend of Teal's was involved in this blood atonement cult, and he had apparently heard of Teal and her abilities. Because again, word had spread throughout this small town, and he had been watching her, targeting her, wanting to use her powers for his cause. While Teal and her friend were playing, this man brought cow's blood into the room and poured it all over Teal and her new friend, and then made them take graphic photos that he would end up showing to his cult buddies. It would only be a year later, when Teal was just 6 years old, that Doc would see her riding her bike alone. He would take this as his opportunity to rape her for the very first time, before putting her back on the bike and making her ride her bike home. The trauma and pain that that little girl had to have experienced is almost too much to bear. It's truly unbelievable that anyone could recover from such a trauma, and yet it seems she has. And this isn't even the worst of it. Now, when anyone first hears this story, obviously you're mortified. It sounds like something out of an independent horror film from the 80s. And when Teal tells the story, she can be very convincing. It all sounds so far fetched, but she tells the story with such detail that there's a part of you that just believes it, because why and how would anyone make something like this up? You want to believe it's true, but is it? Teal refers to this man, the man who took those images of her and her friend covered in blood, Doc. Doc is the man who would bring her to these satanic rituals where she endured torture and was exposed to things no human, let alone a child, should ever be exposed to. She claims to have seen people, even children, get murdered, blood drained from them, and even burned alive, oftentimes at the hands of this Doc character. What's equally odd is she seems to blame her parents more for the trauma she experienced than she blames Doc himself, because her mother brought him into her life anyways, and it was her mother's responsibility to see that something was wrong, that this 50 or 60-year-old man was essaying her young daughter all the time consistently for 13 years. Well, what if I told you that these alleged abuses probably never happened? Doc spoke out to a blog in 2015 and shared that he wasn't really friends with Mrs. Bosworth. In fact, he knew her because she had worked for him at one point, long before Mrs. Bosworth had even been married to Teal's father. He was a veterinarian and worked with horses, and Teal seemed to have an affinity for them. So Teal's mother thought that by having him around, Teal would get to be around animals, and this would make her happy because she just seemed to be such a troubled young woman. In an effort to help Teal, Doc even found a pony for the girl. It seemed that he was truly just trying to be a positive influence in a young woman's life. He wanted to do a favor for an old colleague and help manage this otherwise unmanageable girl. But like with most liars, the timeline in Teal's story just does not add up. Teal claims that this ritualistic and SA happened for 13 years, all the way up until she escaped the cult at 19 years old. But listen to this. Doc wasn't living near her at that point. He actually ended up moving up north, just under an hour away in Idaho. According to Doc, he didn't see Teal again until she was 12 or 13 years old. But according to Teal, he and her throughout her childhood. Teal says that Doc wasn't just involved in the blood atonement cult, but another satanic cult as well, and these two cults seem to be at odds with each other. The satanic cult thought that Teal was evil, and the other cult thought that she was powerful because of these magical abilities she possessed. I mean, she can vividly remember her past lives and predict the future and see energy fields and speak to other entities. The Mormons and other Christians call her demonic, but no, the satanic cults wanted to use her skill in some way. She became the oracle, whether they used her to lure other children to their demise or slit her wrists to drink the magical blood that ran through Teal's veins. She was special to them, and her parents, well, they didn't do anything to stop it because how could they? They didn't even know because Doc was so sneaky in how he snatched her up and took her to these rituals. If they spent time together during the day, Doc would write a fake note to the school saying that he had to pick her up. She'd go to school, walk out by herself, even though she was only in elementary school. I mean, remember, this all started when she was only 6 years old. But also, it was the 90s, and it was just safer back then, according to Teal. People at the school weren't so worried about who was picking you up or dropping you off, which, as someone who went to elementary school in the 90s, I remember always needing an adult to escort me off school property, or I had to be physically signed out by a parent or guardian. Now, I didn't grow up in a rural community like Teal, so perhaps it's different in a small religious town, but considering it would have had to have been the late 80s and early 90s, during or right after the absolute pandemonium of the satanic panic, I can't imagine an elementary school, especially in this conservative Mormon area, letting children just walk out the door willy nilly. But apparently, in the middle of the day, she'd leave school, go with Doc, and then be dropped back off just in time for her mother to pick her up from school. During this time, Doc would condition her. He'd use electroshock therapy on her, do things to scare her, like chase her through the woods for fun, and tell her wild stories about how he was her real father and her mother was a whore. She was even trained to lure children into the cult so that they could be sacrificed in the rituals. She, at this point, had become the perpetrator. She was also somehow trained to wake up at exactly 3:22 a.m. and leave the house with Doc to go to these satanic rituals that often occurred almost an hour away in the wilderness of Idaho. Then she'd miraculously return back home just in time for her parents to wake her up and bring her to school. Now, just to poke some holes in her story a little bit, according to the Logan City School District, elementary school starts at 8 a.m. So that means she gets picked up at 3:22 a.m., drives over state lines and arrives, let's say around 4:15 a.m., completes an elaborate and lengthy satanic ritual for hours, according to her. And let's just say she has to be home by 7 a.m. for her mom to wake her up and get ready for school just so this whole scam can work. She'd have to leave the ritual by 6 a.m. It just seems incredibly far fetched. And when you hear Teal detail the rituals, they seem to be very elaborate in nature. And they seem to be in similar areas. So you're telling me that these two satanic cults that don't like each other are conducting these late night rituals at the exact same time, right around the same area, It just doesn't make any sense. These rituals would involve around 13 members wearing masks and robes and sacrificing some kind of animal or human. They would kill children at these events, some who were the very children Teal had lured into the hands of the group. She claims they targeted foster children and children with dysfunctional families, as well as illegal immigrants, because according to Teal, they are less likely to go to the police for fear of being deported. Now, my big goal with this series is to keep track of what comes out of Teal's mouth and determine just how much of a liar she is. And I have to say, she is quite a smart woman. She does have a lot of knowledge. It could be knowledge that she's acquired from attempting to make her lies sound more truthful, but obviously I had to look up some of these statistics regarding foster children and immigrant children. And sadly, there is a missing foster children epidemic going on in America. In fact, as of November 2023, nearly 35,000 missing children had gone unreported by state agencies. And about 40% of foster children who were reported missing had gone missing multiple times. The foster system is underfunded, understaffed, and there just aren't enough foster families, let alone healthy foster families at that. Not all families are safe for foster kids, especially considering that 40% have tried to run away multiple times. As for the claim regarding the children of undocumented immigrants, I did find sources that said that that was true as well. And that speaks to a much larger issue for a larger video. But the way that we serve and protect children in this country really needs to improve. It's just tragic what happens to these children and their families. And the fact that Teal is exploiting such a tragedy rather than trying to help by claiming that these missing children are likely getting sacrificed to the devil is absolutely despicable for me. She's telling this crazy story to make herself look more reputable because no other human could ever endure the pain and suffering that she's had to. So, to prove her point, she's chosen to exploit these children by coming up with elaborate, violent tales of abuse. It is just disgusting to me. Some of the Teal details is locking children in cages in sinkholes or what she calls lava tubes, which apparently are cave formations in the rock mountains of Utah. They would remain in these cages and lava tubes until their time comes for sacrifice, sometimes being trapped for months before time came for their rituals. Teal also details how Doc treated her. And when she shares her story, so many questions come up. Like, if she was spending this much time with this man, how did her parents not know? Because from the way she makes it sound, it's almost like she lived with him. According to Teal, he forced her to eat food out of a dog bowl, sleep in the bathtub. He left her outside in a ditch for hours behind his house. He chased her through the woods and cut slashes into her rib cage if she lost. And at night, she was enduring these satanic rituals where gashes were cut into her skin so cult members could drink her blood. She was tortured, raped by Doc multiple times, and was even forced into sex work by him. She claimed that by the time she turned 12, it was normal for her to sleep with 2 to 8 men per night. And Doc, well, he collected all the money and would keep it for himself. She also claimed that he killed boys right in front of her. She says he would kidnap them right off the road, force them to kiss Teal while he pleasured himself, then beat them to death or take an axe out that he somehow had on hand and literally hack them to death. And when she tells her story, it is very odd. She doesn't have any emotional reaction or seem affected in any way about what happened to her. In fact, she tells the story in a very matter of fact way, like she's explaining how gravity works. Now, we all deal with trauma differently, but if you decided to be an activist against satanic ritual and child, I'd imagine we'd see some of your heart or your soul in you when you told your story. But with Teal, I just don't see it through her wry smirks and her giggles. It's difficult to connect to her or relate to her because it all just sounds like so much. Then add in the fact that when you put it all together, it just sounds absolutely and completely unbelievable. And we haven't even gotten to the most gruesome details about the rituals. Some of the worst were called black masses. And although the group sacrificed animals, on certain holidays, they would sacrifice humans and children. Since Teal was considered to be an oracle with these special gifts, she never faced the threat of being sacrificed. She was spared, but she was forced to watch the rituals. She provides the graphic and disturbing details of one ritual where a young girl was hogtied to a pole and hung over a fire and was burned alive. She says, due to the heat of the fire, the lungs would have stopped working, instantly killing her. But Teal would watch as the fire burned her skin, causing it to literally melt and drip off her bones. So, fact check. This does not happen. This is something that's depicted in gory films, and there can be mucus, fat, and water released from the body as it burns, but the skin actually sticks more to the bone and becomes charred. Of course, I had to look this up and I was hesitant to go into further detail, but I'm sure you can imagine it is quite a gruesome and disturbing visual. Teal also shared that it takes hours to not just fully burn a human body, but for the fire to get hot enough to actually effectively burn a human body. So I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that she only had an hour and 45 minutes tops to be at these rituals before having to travel back home to be ready for school the next day. So when listening to her tell her story and hearing it multiple times, you just start to notice these little details that don't add up. Like at times, it seems like she did research to make her story believable. She's detailed and she speaks quickly with little opportunity to ask clarifying questions. But sometimes she's so detailed that it just creates another red flag. And when you dive deeper into that red flag, that's when you know that it's just a lie. And if she's lying about these details that can be easily proven by laws of physics that it is impossible to happen, you have to wonder, what else is this woman lying about? Over the years, people who knew Teal growing up have spoken out about her lies. And one of those people is Diana Hansen Ribera. Diana spoke out on the Mormon Stories podcast. Diana says she met Teal when she was 9 or 10, and Teal was a couple years older than her. So she would have met Teal at the height of her and ritual trauma. But Diana tells a different story about Teal, one that seems far less far fetched. She says that although they both went to the same elementary school, Edith Bowen, they didn't actually meet until they became neighbors a few years later. According to Diana, Edith Bowen was a top school for children. There was even a lottery for children to get into the school, and they recruited the best teachers in the area. This alone, for me, contradicts a lot of Teal's claims. Teal paints a picture of a hyper dysfunctional upbringing, but I would argue that the hobbies it sounds like she got involved in would actually lead one to believe that she was quite privileged. She owned a horse, she went to dance classes, gymnastics, she got involved in modeling and ended up being on a ski team. These are not just hobbies that someone can fall into. In fact, I'd say they are some of the most expensive hobbies a person could have. I'd even go as far to say they're rich people hobbies. Furthermore, the crime rate in Logan, Utah is half the national average. So, to try to wrap your head around all of these disturbing claims, it just gets more and more difficult. And Diana paints a very different picture of Teal, one that seems a lot more accurate based off of how Teal presents herself now. And quite simply, it makes a lot more sense. According to Diana, when she met Teal, it became clear that she was a rebellious and challenging child. She was already doing things like stealing alcohol from her parents, and they just really had a difficult time raising her. Asking Teal to do a simple chore like cleaning her room could lead her to an angry outburst, screaming that her parents didn't love her if they made her do a chore. Even Doc would later detail that her parents just never seemed to discipline her. They got her help, sent her to counseling, and then spoiled her with classes and horses just to try to make her happy. But it seems like they never truly got to the root of Teal's issues. My speculation is that Teal believed that she had to be special. But if she had a diagnosis, she would consider that to mean that something is wrong with her. So instead, that diagnosis would have to be transformed into meaning that she had a special gift. And when her parents took her to China to try to further understand her, practitioners in China would only further enforce that belief that perhaps Teal did have special gifts. So when Teal returned, she clung to that idea. She doesn't have a mental health challenge, she's gifted. And her parents trying to help her only made her more angry. And on top of that, she was a master manipulator. Doc speculates now that the reason that he is her target and she's coming up with all of these lies about him was because that he never let her manipulate him. He held firmly to his boundaries, and Teal, as we know, does not like boundaries. Even Diana expressed in her interview that Teal always had her parents wrapped around her finger and described her as a master manipulator. It seemed that she tested all her relationships and was even telling far fetched stories at a very young age. She loved shocking people, getting a reaction out of them. It seemed and still seems to be a way that she feels she holds power over them. She loves to see someone's eyes widen when she tells a story. She loves to see the face of someone go pale because she's just detailed one of the most horrific things they've ever heard. As a young teenager, she even claimed to be a Wiccan or a pagan witch and said that she was the goddess of sex. Diana says she seemed to be fixated on sex at a very young age and would even show Diana pornography. And not just vanilla, basic pornography that a curious teenager might seek out. Teal was interested in BDSM and bestiality, and she claimed to hold a special power over men. But maybe she was overcompensating for something, because Teal's puberty seemed to be delayed. So when Diana started developing before Teal, Teal became obsessed with her body. Teal wasn't getting the curves like Diana was, and she wasn't getting the attention that she was supposed to be getting. Teal was and still is a very controlling person, even with her friends. She didn't like Diana having other friends or hobbies. So the two of them were inseparable. So inseparable that in fact they bathed together. Diana said that their parents actually had to sit them down and say they couldn't just spend all of this time with only each other. It was almost like they were attached at the hip. But don't forget, according to Teal, she's going to nightly satanic rituals and getting sewn into corpses. She's being forced into work and ritualistic both during school hours and at night. So Diana hears this and she can't imagine how Teal would have ever had the time to go through all this pain and suffering. And Diana would have started to see some signs. When you hear Diana's story and you put it up next to Teal's, there's simply no way both can be true. Teal claims that she was a model, a high end one at that. She says that at 12, Doc forced her into modeling because she had aged out of being a sex worker for pedophiles. And she actually really loved modeling and began sharing stories of being on international runways. She told Diana that even though she was only 14 or 15 at the time, men were rubbing her down with oil backstage of her runway shows. Her big modeling fashion career really consisted of taking somewhat explicit photos with horses and doing little runway shows for teenagers at the mall for a brand called Maurice's. Which, fun fact, I actually worked at Maurice's in college, and I can tell you it is certainly not high fashion. Think of it as slightly elevated limited too. So we'll just check another lie off the list of all the lies we're hearing from Teal. It gets difficult to keep track of all of them, but I'm considering this episode a little lie tracker because I'm going to debunk as many of these as I can. Teal likes to demonize those in the mental health profession, claiming that therapists and counselors just wanted to give her a diagnosis and pop a pill to, quote, fix her, unquote. She says she's received countless diagnoses from schizoaffective disorder, histrionic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and claims that she was just given medication to combat all her symptoms. Diana, however, of course, details a much different story and shares that Teal actually would spend a lot of time looking through her mother's counseling books, trying to see if she had a diagnosis. She seemed to want to know if she was a narcissist or perhaps she had a comorbidity. She, on her own, sought out that information as a teenager. Allegedly, she wanted a diagnosis so she could have her own victim story, and the characters that she became obsessed with in movies and TV shows seemed to possess the exact diagnosis that Teal seemed to have or want to have. At a very young age, Diana was beginning to show signs of self harm, and obviously her parents were very concerned for her. Teal saw how this concern got Diana a lot of attention, so she too began to self harm. To twist the knife even further, she also developed an ED. It seemed that if she saw Diana get attention from any challenge that she was facing, Teal would then adopt that challenge as her own. She even went as far to show Diana the best ways to harm herself. So Teal details these stories of ritual abuse where people cut her as a punishment and drank her blood because she was magical. But on the other hand, Diana alleges that all those scars and marks on Teal are actually self harm scars and not from ritualistic abuse. And they were signs that Teal clearly needed a lot of help. Teal would end up going to counseling when she was around 12 or 13, and Doc would also be back in her life to help her. See, he considered himself a healer and claims that Teal learned some of her hands on healing techniques from him. She didn't just inherently have them, they were actually a learned skill. By the time Teal turned 16, she was able to somehow graduate high school early. She claims it's because she's just so smart. But after hearing her story, you can't help but wonder if she was leaving school during the day and was out all night at these rituals. It's just difficult to believe that she was such a successful student. Doc actually alleges that she was not very smart, but she was able to manipulate her teachers and pretend she needed extra help. Things are just really hard for her. I need just some extra support. I'm trying so hard. And then they would help her pass. But as she was finishing high school, Teal alleges that she was constantly being drugged to keep her prepped and primed for her rituals. Like Pavlov's dog, she claimed she could turn off all negative emotions at the snap of a finger, that she had to stay in a positive mental space due to all her trauma and be ready for the rituals because the cult followers needed her to be in a positive headspace. She called this the split program, where her subconscious literally starts believing that she is two different people living two different lives. The way she was conditioned to help control her emotions and lose consciousness was so the cult members could put her through this ritualistic use without having any memory of it. And they did this through the use of ketamine. Doc apparently had access to large amounts of this because he was a veterinarian. So he would dose her, and he would dose her a lot. So often that she claims to have become addicted to it. She claims that she became so addicted to it that she started to have seizures. To combat these seizures, Doc thought it was because she had built up such a tolerance to the. So he gave her what I'm assuming is a tincture to rub K all over her body because apparently K can absorb into your skin and stop anxiety. Now, this was another glaring red flag for me. Alarm bells just started ringing, so of course I had to look into this further. I searched, can be used topically to render someone unconscious or heal anxiety? And as you might have guessed, the results prove that this is just another one of Teal's absurd lies. In fact, clinical trials only just begun last year in 2023 to test the effects of topical K on PTSD, not anxiety. The K is in a cream form and is administered at the base of the neck where we have these free nerve endings. This can induce neurochemical reactions that can transmit a therapeutic effect directly into the brain. And this new method could really help a lot of people living with PTSD. But I want to make it very clear these are very recent clinical trials. They did not start in the late 90s as Teal is claiming. And more clinical trials are required to determine the true effectiveness of this treatment. So, gotcha again, Teal. Now, once again, the timeline here gets a little murky. When Teal tells her story, she does what seems to be a time jump from when she was 16 to when she was 19. And she shares the story of how she finally realized she could leave. She could escape. She had a choice. She no longer needed to be the victim to this monster she claimed Doc was. And quick warning, this is extremely gruesome and extremely graphic. When I first read this and heard it, my jaw was on the floor. Doc had driven Teal out into the woods to perform a ritual with the body of a man who had recently shot himself. He had put the gun in his mouth, so the lower half of his face and jaw was missing. The corpse was in rigor mortis, where all the muscles in the body stiffen and freeze. This means that the penis was also erect. So Doc made Teal have intercourse with this corpse while he watched and likely pleasured himself. Oh, and also, he had allegedly cut off a portions of the man's thigh to snack on because, by the way, he was also a cannibal. So he ate the leg of this corpse while Teal had sex with it. What? She goes so far to share that during this encounter, her face was very close to the missing jaw of the deceased man. And this was the exact moment that she realized she needed to stop this. She could stop this, and she could leave. So she fled the area, ran out of the woods, and escaped in her car, which for some reason Doc had arranged for someone to bring her car to her at this scene, but then that person just disappeared. And we would later find out from Doc that she actually never had a car. But according to Teal, she got in her car and drove all the way down to Salt Lake City to stay at a friend named Blake's house, who she happened to also meet at some point during all of this ritualistic use, but she trusted that he would be a safe haven for her. I mean, this whole tale just makes you sick when you think about it. And once again, I feel like you have to reach to the depths of actual hell to come up with a story like this. So, obviously, I had to see if this claim was debunkable, much like the other ones. Can you imagine my discomfort in Googling the phrase, "Can a male corpse get an erection during rigor mortis?" Well, you probably guessed it, but the answer is a resounding no. The penis is not a muscle. An erection only happens when blood flows into the penis. So the only way for a corpse to experience an erection during rigor mortis is if the body was either hung or the person was face down when they passed away because the blood would be pulled down by gravity. So, yet another lie by Teal that can be debunked with a quick and very uncomfortable Google search and a little science. After she fled to Salt Lake City at 19, she claimed that she never returned to Logan, although Diana claims that she recalls her being around past that age. And it wouldn't surprise me because it's really difficult to confirm exactly where she was and what she was doing between 2004 and 2011 when she wrote her first spiritual based book. We really only have a deep understanding of what her earlier life was like up to 2005. And then there's a 6-year gap. Where was she? Where was Teal? We'll explore that in the next episode. So after fleeing to Salt Lake City, she would write Doc a letter that he would never respond to. I'm not sure why you would send the satanic cult leader who tortured and raped you for 13 years a little life update after escaping his grasp, but apparently Teal did. She wanted to share with him how she had posed for Playboy. This proved to be false, and was competing as a professional athlete in downhill skiing. In this letter, she told him that she had placed fourth in a national skiing competition and was preparing for the 2010 Olympics, which, listen, I grew up skiing, and doing it competitively is not just something you can jump into and then qualify for the Olympics. Those athletes likely train as children and throughout their adolescent lives. Furthermore, although she was on the ski team, she never placed fourth, and actually, she struggled with the sport, according to the president of the organization that she skied with. Furthermore, while she's posing for Playboy and becoming an Olympic athlete, she's also in extensive therapy with ritual expert Barbara Snow. And in 2005, Barbara Snow would encourage Teal to go to the police with her claims of 13 years of ritualistic abuse at the hands of the man that she calls Doc. On the next installment of Deity or Delusion, we look into the next phase of Teal's life, when she was involved with Barbara Snow, controversial ritual therapist and known figure during the satanic panic of the 1980s. In the next episode, we'll learn all about Barbara's practices, modalities, and see what kind of impact those practices had on Teal, and see if Teal is using those same methods to heal her current followers. We'll also dive into the frenzy that was the satanic panic. So I hope you are looking forward to that episode. It will be a wild one. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Spotify or a comment if you are watching this on the channel. This will be a multi-part series, so make sure your notifications are on for when I upload the next installment. The podcast version will be released on Thursdays, and the video will be released on YouTube on Fridays. Now, if you're listening on Spotify, make sure to check out my YouTube channel, Let The Fresh Erin, as we will be releasing more breakdowns of Doc's perspective and reading the letters and emails that Teal sent Doc and Diana as fun bonus videos throughout the week. So please make sure you are subscribed for more. Thank you all so much for supporting my work, and please stay safe out there. Ask questions and always stay skeptical. Until next time, goodbye.